So lots going on, provincial election in a few months, and the budget that came out recently, we are looking at a record deficit, and the debt service cost has gone up considerably, 26% or 24.5% as compared to the previous year. The government says that you want to balance the budget, but that seems more like an aspiration now than a firm goal. What would you like to say to that?
Well, first of all, the budget is about choices, and the province faces a situation that's not unique in the world right now. High interest rates from central banks, low global commodity prices. We export a lot of commodities to the world. Our customers around the world, their economies are slowing down. And those two factors are also combined with a remarkable thing in BC. Our population is growing at an historic rate. You put all these things together, the decision around the budget is now the time to cut services, reduce spending on infrastructure, and so on? Or is now the time when people really need the support? We made an obvious choice. We have to build the hospitals. We have to build the schools, the roads, and the transit. Otherwise, our province isn't going to be able to guarantee the basic services that everyone deserves. And we need the people to run those services, the teachers, the healthcare workers, and so on. So we made a clear choice to support the services people depend on and support families in this time. Experts tell us interest rates are going to come down. So support for families for this year when they're really struggling with higher costs was a big priority in the budget. And we were able to do this because we were fiscally responsible. 6 of our last 7 budgets have been balanced. We have half of the debt to GDP ratio of Ontario or Quebec. We have the space to be able to do this, and we're going to make sure we're supporting British Columbians.
There is money for infrastructure projects in the budget, but it's kind of still short on details. Like, in Surrey, we know that we need a lot of new schools. And there was an announcement made earlier this week by the Education Minister, but we're still fairly short of what we need to be able to get rid of all the portables, which was one of the flagship promises when NDP came into power. Do you think that we would ever be in a position where we can actually get rid of the portables in the province? Because we had a listener telling us earlier this week that let alone Surrey, even in Prince George, a population of 80,000 people, there are portables in schools over there, and even those have not been removed. So Surrey seems to be an impossible, like a Herculean task.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing in Surrey. If you'd asked me, if we build 10,000 student spaces in Surrey, will we still have portables? Well, the answer was under historic population growth, no, we would have gotten rid of the portables. Now we're doing 12,000 student spaces in Surrey, and we're still going to have to do more because the population is growing so fast here. And one of the things that does make me a little bit crazy is the decision of the previous government for 4 years not to build a single new school in Surrey. I don't know how you can justify that decision. So we're caught up from that backlog, but now with the population growth that we have to do even more. So we announced a couple new schools in Surrey. We're going to do more. We're also looking at expanding a number of different schools using modular components where they're an expansion of the school. It's not a portable, but they can be built faster. Because the population growth in Langley and Surrey, right up the valley, is huge, and we need to build those schools for kids. We've got $4 billion in the capital budget for schools.
When it comes to population growth, a lot of the blame gets shared with or deflected towards the federal government because we've had record number of people coming into the country, and nobody can deny that fact. Is it possible within our structure of the country that provinces can put a foot down and say to the federal government that we cannot really take any more people? Because we know here and in other provinces as well, but especially here in the Greater Vancouver area, that infrastructure is lacking, and we've got such a huge burden on that same infrastructure that now we are beginning to see quality of life deteriorate. So is province at all in a position where it can tell the federal government that, hey, you need to put the brakes on, and this is not something that can be continued for a long time?
Yeah, one of the things we've really encouraged the federal government to think about, and it's the reality faced by British Columbians, is the infrastructure that we're building, the housing, the schools, the hospitals, the roads, that our population growth needs to be kept in pace with that essential infrastructure in our province. So we're really encouraging them to think that. It is, though, a challenge for us in British Columbia because we need a lot of new arrivals in British Columbia to deliver healthcare, to be teachers, to open businesses, and to fill jobs that we have in the province. which is why we did the credential recognition work, so when people come here, they're actually able to work in the fields that they have training in, and they're not blocked by these professional bodies from doing that work. So making sure that the people that are coming in are able to get to work and help build our province right away is really important. Making sure that the federal government is supporting us on infrastructure, transit, highways, hospitals, schools. You know, we're pushing them really hard on funding for the Massey Tunnel, for example. We're going to fund that provincially. We have to do it. But if the feds come in and help pay for some of that, then we can use that money for other infrastructure that we need in other parts of the province. We're dedicating funding to Highway 1. This is a trade corridor for the whole country. We're going to do it. We have to support those families where people have to drive back and forth to work. They're sitting in traffic. But if the federal government comes in and provides some of that funding, then we can expand that. So encouraging them to see that population growth is important, but we also need that infrastructure help as well, as one of the main missions when I talk to the Prime Minister and federal cabinet ministers.
BC Bills got a big shot in the arm when the federal government not only gave funding but also encouraged other provinces to follow BC's lead. So that must be a welcome relief for you, a good endorsement from the federal side.
Yeah, it was very nice to see that the money will help. And for your viewers who don't know this program, this is where we use publicly owned land, city land, province land, federal government land, First Nations land, and use public financing and sped up permits to construct rental housing and housing for purchase, where 30% of your income is the target. And this is housing for the middle class, people with incomes, families with incomes up to $200,000. And so it's a really important program. It was important to see the feds there. It was nice to get the endorsement. Of course, you know, as soon as Mr. Trudeau says this is a good idea, Mr. Poilievre has to come out and say this is the worst thing he's ever seen. You know, it's just the nature of politics federally right now. But a committee of Conservative and a Liberal task force on housing just announced their recommendations for how to deal with housing in Canada. And British Columbia is already doing all these things. So that was a really nice endorsement. Here's a Conservative and a Liberal saying what the NDP is doing in BC is the right thing. I thought that was really good news.
Would the BC Builds program also have a rent-to-own component in it, as suggested by Mr. Falcon, your opponent? After the BC Builds program was announced, he said that this should have a rent-to-own component as well.
It will have an attainable ownership component.
Okay.
I don't know all the details of Mr. Falcon's plan. They did have a rent-to-own program when they were previously in government that didn't work. So I don't know if he's planning on relaunching that or what his plan is. But the big question I've been asking Mr. Falcon is, you know, rent-to-own what? He opposes the ability for people to build more than one unit in a single-family lot. He opposes the speculation and vacancy tax that prevents people from leaving homes vacant as investments. He opposes our Airbnb regulations that say you can't buy up single-family homes and a bunch of strata units to run a big private hotel. We need that housing for people. So, I mean, I'm all for the idea that people who are renting get a chance to buy something, but he is opposing the vast majority of our measures to increase housing supply. And so I don't quite understand what he thinks people are going to be renting to own.
Premier, there is a huge push towards electrification, and at the same time last year we know that the province, BC Hydro, had to import about 20% of the power that we use from the US. This year, given the level in our water reservoirs, you've also expressed concern that, you know, electricity production could be a challenge in 2024 as well. What is the province doing? What would your government do to make sure that we are self-sufficient and we don't have to import energy from places or maybe power plants which are not using green technology, could be burning coal, and we are using that electricity in BC when our demand is going up, because there is also this push towards electrification?
Yeah, great question. So BC Hydro last full year made $1 billion trading electricity. They import electricity at times when it's cheap, and they export when, especially the West Coast is desperate for electricity, or Alberta, at higher prices. And that helps keep rates low for British Columbians, and it helps support the provincial budget sometimes as well. But you're right, over this last year, especially with lower water levels in reservoirs behind dams, our hydro production has been reduced. And so this was an importing year for us. And the concern is, going forward with the drought that we're going to see next summer, it may be a similar kind of issue. So BC Hydro has put a call for power, for wind power, for solar power, where when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing, we can generate electricity. We've got huge resources that we're not tapping at all. And then, when it's not, we can run the water through the dams. These are big batteries that allow us to produce electricity even at night, which other jurisdictions can't, or even when the wind's not blowing. But when it is, we can generate additional electricity. So that's our focus, to bring on more resources. We have a $36 billion capital plan with BC Hydro to build electrical infrastructure for our growing populations, for new homes, to make sure we're not in the situation Alberta was in, which was saying to everybody, hey, turn out the lights, turn off your heating, all this. We might have a blackout. We want to really avoid that situation, so we're building out the grid.
Is there a possibility that this year BC Hydro might still have to import power?
Yeah, it's hard to predict. Some years are import years, some years are net export years. The important question for ratepayers is, how much are we paying? And so you can import a lot of electricity and still have lower rates, and BC Hydro can still make money. And so that's what they're going to continue to be focused on with their trading arm. But we're not even scratching the surface in terms of our ability to generate electricity through wind and solar, but also retrofits to existing dams to upgrade the generators that are in those dams to produce even more power. That's what we have to do. It's a big economic opportunity for us to bring a lot of jobs. There were 450 jobs that came to Maple Ridge, a battery assembly factory that makes batteries for power tools and these kinds of things.
When we know that there is this uncertainty about whether we'll have to import power or not, will be an export situation or an import situation. The budget also promised a $100 rebate for households, for BC Hydro customers, up to $300 for businesses. That doesn't really go a long way in giving people the rebate, because it's not a single installment either. It's spread over the year. The BC United member, Mike DeJong, today in the legislature said that the cabinet has actually signed an order through which the BC Hydro rates could go up by 16% after the election. So he's alleging that as well. So how do you see the rationale behind giving this rebate to BC Hydro ratepayers when we could potentially be looking at a power deficit yet again this year?
Yeah. So first of all, the money for the rebate is coming from the provincial government. It's not coming from hydro, although the money is showing up on your hydro bill. So just to reassure people about that. But, it's a bit rich for Mr. DeYoung. They had their projection of hydro rates, what they were going to do. We've been in government for 7 years. Our rates are well below what they were projecting rates were going to be. They're below the rate of inflation. We've kept hydro affordable for people, and we're going to continue to do that work. Now, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they opposed the rebate for hydro, the BC family benefit, the clean energy tax credit. They continually oppose these initiatives that support families, and I don't know why, but I do know the record. We're building more homes, producing more electricity at lower rates for British Columbians. I mean, we created 70,000 jobs in the last 12-month period. They issued a press release when Kevin Falcon was the finance minister for 12,000 jobs. So I'd put our record up against theirs anytime, and I won't take my advice from Mr. DeYoung, who was telling people we were going to build fewer homes and that their electricity was going to be more expensive if the Liberals were still in power.
So about the decriminalization policy, we know that the appeals court rejected the government's appeal to put a halt on the injunction. The injunction is expiring 31st of March anyway. So what is the government's plan after March 31st? And also, Oregon is now recriminalizing drug possession. So do you think that BC might need to do something similar? Because the intended impact of what we were thinking this policy would have, we've not really seen that. Overdose deaths are still going up. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, just a correction. Our overdose deaths are down slightly, which is it's still a horrific number of people who are dying. But we're not seeing what Alberta is seeing, which is a 25% increase. We're not seeing what Saskatchewan is seeing, a 30% plus increase. So we're seeing those numbers come down slightly, which is positive, but it's still too high. And I don't think there's any jurisdiction that has this figured out, the best way to go after this. So we're watching each other. What's Alberta doing well? What's Saskatchewan doing well? What's Oregon doing well? What's Washington State doing well? Because we're facing this similar kind of issue. I worked briefly as a drug prosecutor, and I prosecuted this woman for possession of drugs. And my salary was paid, her defense lawyer's salary was paid, the judge's salary was paid. She was dragged into court, she was convicted, and then she was immediately released. I don't know how that saves her life. I don't know how that helps her get drug treatment. I don't know how that makes life better for British Columbians. They spend tax dollars doing this. I don't know why. We have to go after the drug dealers, arrest the drug dealers. We have to get healthcare workers between predatory drug dealers and people struggling with addiction. And that's what we're going to continue to try to do. The people who say, just if we get rid of decriminalization, they know that's not going to save a single life, and that's not going to move us forward on this. It's just going to waste the police time when they should be going after the big drug dealers. So we've opened a huge number of treatment beds. We need people to be able to rebuild their lives, get the drug treatment they need, give them that opportunity. But this is a really hard issue, and we're going to keep looking for every opportunity we have to help people rebuild their lives and deal with their addictions.
But the challenge that this has led to is the open public drug use, which now your government is trying to curb or is trying to combat. But now the courts are saying that you can't really do that. So at least until March 31st, the injunction is in place. What after that? Will you be making some changes to Bill 34, or are there other things in the works which could address this problem of rampant open drug use?
Yeah, it's really frustrating. So we regulate tobacco, we regulate alcohol, and the court says, well, you can't regulate hard drugs. It's like, how can that possibly be true? We don't believe that treating people with compassion around addiction means we have no standards in our society. You can't use your drugs in the doorway of a business. You can't use them in a bus stop. Don't use them in a park or in a playground, sports fields. This is a very straightforward set of rules. Go to the healthcare center that we have with the nurses, with the connections to treatment, to stay alive so you don't overdose. It feels to me like this is, people say, oh, either there shouldn't be any rules. People should be able to do whatever they want. And then other people say, no, we have to take everybody who's struggling with addiction, we have to arrest them. There is something in between where we understand and have compassion for the addiction, and we say, go to the place that we've set up for you. Go to the place where we can connect you to treatment. And that'll be the argument we make in court. We think that's the path forward. If we see another jurisdiction having more success doing something else, then we'll look at that. But this is, as I say, a really challenging issue, and I just feel so terrible for all the family members who have lost someone because of these toxic drugs. It's so awful.
Premier, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.